Danny DeVito already turned 80, but behind the laughter, the Emmy wins, and the iconic roles is a story no one was supposed to hear. His own mother admitted she never wanted him. His father, violent, unstable, and out of control by night. Police were called to their house more than a dozen times before Danny was even old enough to drive. But that's not the part he kept hidden. For decades, Danny DeVito lived with a rare condition that caused unbearable pain. A condition Hollywood told him to fix with surgery. They even offered him millions to look normal. He refused. He burned the contract. And now, after one explosive moment on live TV, the truth is finally coming out. Danny DeVito wasn't just born into a tough life. He was born into rejection. From the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. It was November 17th, 1944, in Neptune, New Jersey. His mother, Julia, was 40 years old, exhausted, and already raising multiple children in a cramped Italian-American household. Another baby wasn't part of the plan. She didn't keep that a secret either. Years later, in a moment most parents would never dare speak aloud, she looked her son in the eye and said, "I didn't want him." Not, "It was hard." Not, "We struggled." Just, "I didn't want him." That kind of sentence can stick to a person's bones. Most people carry wounds from childhood, but very few are told, in plain language, that their existence was unwanted. For Danny, that wound wasn't just emotional. It shaped how he saw himself. It sat in the background of every moment, a quiet voice saying, "You were never supposed to be here," but he didn't let it crush him. That feeling, that invisible scar, turned into fuel. He wasn't the biggest kid, or the tallest, or the strongest. But what he lacked physically, he made up for with defiance. He cracked jokes, pulled pranks, made people laugh. Not just because it was fun, but because it gave him something his home didn't: attention. Every laugh was proof that he mattered. Every smile from a stranger was a win. Because at home, smiles were rare. His siblings were older, closer to each other in age, and often too busy surviving to look after their youngest brother. His parents were strict, traditional, and overwhelmed. Julia handled most of the parenting alone, and she never pretended to be soft. She called things how she saw them, even if it hurt. And Danny? Danny was the kid who slipped through the cracks. When he tried to stand out, he was told to sit down. When he asked for more, he was told to be grateful. And when he cried, which wasn't often, no one really noticed. But here's what no one expected. Rejection didn't make him small. It made him sharp. It made him observant. He learned to read people fast. He knew when to push for a joke and when to back off. He studied people's faces like scripts, learning what worked and what didn't. By the time he was a teenager, Danny had developed the one thing no one could take from him: presence. He could walk into a room and shift the energy, not by towering over people, but by knowing how to hold their attention. Still, that early pain of being told he wasn't wanted never really went away. It lingered in the background, like a shadow on the wall. Even when the fame came, even when the letters poured in, even when the awards were stacked on shelves, that voice was still there. And what he didn't know then was that rejection would become a theme in his life, not just from family, but from Hollywood, from casting agents, from directors who couldn't see past his height or his looks. But before any of that, before the movies, before the sitcoms, before the chaos and comedy, Danny had to survive something far more dangerous: his own home. If being unwanted was Danny's first wound, what came next left even deeper scars. From the outside, the DeVito household looked ordinary. His father, Daniel Sr., owned a candy shop in Asbury Park. During the day, he was friendly, well-liked, always quick with a joke. But at night, everything changed. When the sun went down and the bottle came out, the man who sold sweets turned sour. The laughter stopped. The tension started. Danny was just a kid, but he learned to read his father's moods like weather reports. The sound of footsteps, the clink of glass, the way the front door slammed, all were warnings. When the shouting started, he knew to disappear. Sometimes he'd hide in closets, sometimes he'd run barefoot to the neighbor's house, hoping they'd open the door before things got worse. Between 1950 and 1955, the police were called to the DeVito home at least 17 times. That's more than 3 calls per year. And those are just the ones that made the record. In those moments, Danny wasn't acting tough. He wasn't cracking jokes. He was just trying to stay safe. And beyond the front door? The streets weren't any kinder. His neighborhood was falling apart. Heroin was flooding the blocks. Kids he grew up with started disappearing. Some to prison, some to addiction. Some never came back at all. 2 of his childhood friends were dead before they even turned 16. Danny knew he had to escape, and not just from his house, but from the entire world he was born into. So, at 14, he made a plan. He saved every cent he could from odd jobs, sweeping floors, bagging groceries, cleaning back rooms. $237 was what he managed to scrape together. And back then, that was real money. He didn't just ask his parents to let him leave. He strategized. He waited until his father was sober and full of guilt. He got his parish priest to step in and help make the case. His mother, maybe still haunted by her own confession, finally agreed. That's how Danny landed at Oratory Prep, a private Catholic school far from the chaos. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy, but it was different. It was quiet. And for the first time in his life, he had space to breathe. Out of the 12 friends he had back home, only 3 made it past 25 without ending up in prison, addicted or gone. That decision to escape when he did may have saved his life, but no matter how far he ran, there was one thing he couldn't leave behind. From the outside, Danny DeVito was the funny guy, the oddball, the comic relief. But what no one knew, what even Hollywood didn't understand for years, was that he was living in chronic, constant pain. Danny was born with a rare condition called Fairbanks disease, a genetic bone disorder that affects growth and causes progressive joint damage. It's why he only grew to 4 feet 10 inches. But it wasn't just about height. This condition meant his bones, especially in his hips, knees, and back, were under pressure every day. From his teens into his 30s, he was already experiencing pain levels that hovered between a 6 and 8 out of 10 on a good day. Most people didn't know this. Even now, many still don't. Danny didn't complain. He didn't play the victim. When doctors offered him pain meds, he often refused them. He didn't want to risk addiction. He didn't want pity. He wanted to work. And he did. He pushed himself through performances, through stunts, through shoots that would have sidelined other actors. During one flew over the cuckoo's nest, he collapsed on set 4 separate times. He laughed it off, pretended it was part of the scene. No one questioned it. He never stopped moving, never gave his pain an audience. But privately, he did something few stars ever do. He gave back. Quietly, without press, he donated over $12 million to medical research for skeletal disorders. No interviews, no red carpets, just quiet checks to labs and clinics working on treatments for kids like him. Kids who were suffering and didn't have the same platform he had. He never put his name on the projects. He didn't want credit. He just wanted the suffering to stop. For someone else. Hollywood never saw that part of him. They saw the comedy, the charm, the funny voice, the small man with the big energy. But they never saw the ice baths, the back spasms, the nights he couldn't sleep, the mornings he couldn't stand without assistance. And despite all that, he kept going. Because for Danny, pain was normal. He'd lived with it so long, he didn't even realize how much he was enduring until much later. The world would come to love his face, his voice, his wild, unpredictable characters. But in the early years, the industry didn't want someone like him. And soon, they'd make him an offer they thought he couldn't refuse. One that would test everything he believed about himself. Before Danny DeVito became a household name, he was something else entirely. A beautician. Yes, really. Hair dryers, curling irons, manicures, not exactly the path most people expect from the man who'd one day play a sewer-dwelling villain in Batman. But for Danny, it made sense. He needed a job. And honestly, he liked being around people, especially women. He trained for it seriously, logging over 1,500 hours at beauty school. He didn't coast through either. He graduated second in his class. His sister Angela ran a salon called Curl Up and Dye, and Danny quickly became the most in-demand stylist on the schedule. People booked appointments months in advance. He even invented his own signature look, the Neptune twist, an elaborate style that, yes, actually won awards. At first, he saw it as a way to meet girls, but something clicked. Working with people, making them feel good about themselves, gave him a strange kind of power. For the first time, people listened to him, laughed with him, saw him, and then, one day, everything shifted. While working on a regular client's hair, he struck up a conversation with her husband, a theater producer. The man watched Danny move, joke, perform as he styled. And then he said something that changed everything. "You should audition for a play." Danny didn't take it seriously at first, but the seed was planted. And when he later applied to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, he didn't even plan to be an actor. He applied to learn stage makeup. But the school had other ideas. They asked him to perform a monologue. He was caught off guard. No script, no training. So he picked something random, a scene from The Rainmaker. He performed it raw, with no polish, just instinct. And something about that performance grabbed them. They offered him a spot on the acting track, not makeup. He didn't say yes immediately. He went back to the salon, unsure. But 3 days later, they called again. This time, offering a partial scholarship. That second call changed his life. Soon, he was living in New York, chasing a dream he never meant to have. And his roommate? None other than Michael Douglas, son of Hollywood legend Kirk Douglas, though he didn't talk about that back then. They were just two broke kids in a freezing apartment, eating canned beans and praying for auditions. But while Michael booked a few gigs, Danny kept hitting walls. His size, his voice, his look. It wasn't what casting directors were after. He was funny. He was talented. He just wasn't normal. Between 1967 and 1970, Danny DeVito auditioned 248 times, and from all of that effort, he landed just 3 small roles, earning less than $800 total. He was broke, beyond broke. To survive, he took the strangest jobs anyone would take. He parked cars, cleaned cages at the LA Zoo, and, at one point, worked as a live mannequin in a department store window. And yes, he read monologues to chimpanzees. Not as a joke. As rehearsal. Slept in the back of his old VW Beetle. Ate in soup kitchens. And through it all, he kept showing up to auditions, even though every door seemed to close in his face. He almost gave up. More than once. After one especially brutal rejection, he filled out an application for a postal job, thinking maybe it was time to move on. That same day, The phone rang. It was about a role in a film adaptation of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The producer, his old roommate, Michael Douglas. What they didn't know was that Danny had already played the character of Martini in a stage version of the play. He knew every line, every beat. He didn't even need a script. Danny stepped in and delivered a version so raw, so lived in, it left no doubt. The movie was shot inside a real psychiatric hospital in Oregon, with real patients used as extras. It was intense, but for Danny, it was familiar. That chaos, that unpredictability. It reminded him of home. He only appeared on screen for 5 minutes and 52 seconds, but he made every second count. Director Milos Forman believed in him, kept him in the role even when the studio pushed for someone more marketable. The film went on to sweep the Oscars, winning 5 major awards, including Best Picture. Danny didn't win any statues himself, but he didn't need to. He was finally on the map. But just as he was finally being noticed, Hollywood tried to pull him in another direction. One that would test whether he'd trade who he was for who they wanted him to be. Hollywood didn't know what to do with Danny DeVito. He'd proven he could act. Audiences liked him. But behind the scenes, producers saw him as a problem. Too short, too strange-looking, too different. That's when they made him the offer. One studio executive pulled him aside. Quiet room. No managers, no press. They laid it out clearly. Plastic surgery, bone lengthening, facial reconstruction. The technology wasn't perfect, but it could fix him, they said. Make him more marketable, more castable. More like the kind of face they could put on a billboard. And the price tag? Nearly $1 million in today's money. That's how badly they wanted to mold him into something else. That's how little they understood him. Danny didn't say anything in that meeting. He just took the contract, walked out. Later, he took it to the beach, built a small bonfire, and burned it. No press release, no public stand. Just fire and ash, and a quiet refusal to sell his soul. His response to a casting director that week became legendary. "I'd rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of someone else." That was the line. That was the choice. And it cost him. He lost roles, was passed over for leads. Agents called him difficult when he turned down suggestions to modify his image. But he never looked back. Then, in 1978, when it looked like his career might stall again, Danny did something no one in Hollywood could believe. He left film for television. At the time, that was considered career suicide. If you were in movies, you stayed in movies. TV was where careers ended, not where they took off. But when he read the pilot script for a sitcom called Taxi, he saw something different, something wild, something human. A character named Louie de Palma. Nasty, rude, hilarious, and deeply flawed. Danny needed to play him. He didn't just show up to the audition, he dominated it. He walked into the room, slammed the script on the table and said, "One question, who wrote this SHTT?" Then he read the lines, delivered a full 7-minute monologue, and left the room silent. A BC was nervous. He was too short, too strange, too unknown. But Taxi creator James L. Brooks stood his ground. He said if they didn't cast Danny, he'd walk. And that was it. Danny signed the contract that day, even though it paid 40% less than what other actors were getting. And just like that, everything changed. Louie de Palma became an instant sensation. Within 8 episodes, Danny was receiving more than 11,000 fan letters. Viewers couldn't get enough of the foul-mouthed dispatcher with a chip on his shoulder and a voice that sounded like gravel in a blender. But here's what no one saw. Every night before shooting, Danny would sit alone in a dark corner of the set, not meditating, not preparing lines, but listing every single person who had ever rejected him. Casting directors, teachers, agents, his own mother. He'd let the anger simmer, then walk onto set and let Louie loose. And it worked. By 1980, 93% of Americans could recognize Louie de Palma just by his voice. Danny won a Golden Globe, then an Emmy the following year. His Emmy acceptance speech was just 12 words long. "Thank you. I'm really happy about this. Taxi is the best show on television." The shortest in Emmy history, but behind the scenes, the pressure was building. Around this time, Danny met Rhea Perlman, and in true DeVito fashion, the story was weird. She came over to break up with his roommate, and ended up talking to Danny for 6 hours straight instead. Within 22 minutes, he says he knew he wanted to marry her. They moved in together 2 weeks later, cramming into his 450-square-foot apartment. They kept their relationship quiet, even after she joined the Taxi cast. No one on set even knew they were together. But the chemistry was undeniable. After marrying in 1982, they made a promise to each other. No matter how busy they got, they'd never go more than 2 weeks without working on something together. A play, a short film, a business idea, anything. That bond was creative and personal. In 1983, while still on Taxi, they quietly launched Jersey Films, their own production company. Nights, weekends, no press, no hype. What people didn't see was that during this time, Danny's body was already breaking down. His condition, Fairbanks disease, doesn't fade. It gets worse. The pain moved from his knees to his back, then his hips. He was working 12-hour days, then heading home to ice packs, heating pads, and a growing stack of medical bills. But he kept smiling, kept cracking jokes, because he knew something no one else did. If he ever let the pain show, the work might disappear. Hollywood likes its oddballs funny, not fragile. So he hid it. Even while producing films, acting in hits, building a family, Danny was pushing through pain that would have sidelined most people completely. And no one noticed, until decades later, when it all started to come apart, and he finally decided to tell the truth. For decades, Danny DeVito kept it together. He smiled through red carpets, laughed through interviews, and made pain look like performance. But in 2025, the mask cracked. It happened live, on national TV, during what was supposed to be a routine appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live. At first, it was the usual DeVito charm. Funny stories, self-deprecating jokes, the crowd eating it up. But something shifted during the second segment. The jokes got sharper, the tone changed. There was a pause, a question, something off-camera that triggered a reaction. And then Danny snapped. He didn't scream. He didn't storm off. He just stood up, mid-conversation, removed his microphone, and walked off stage. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. For a few seconds, the room was silent. Then came the confusion. And within hours, the internet exploded. Clips flooded social media. Hashtags like DeVito Unleashed and Danny v. Kimmel started trending. Some called it a meltdown. Others called it bravery. Everyone had an opinion. Was it stress? A medical issue? A personal slight? No one knew for sure. But the rumors were immediate. Some said Kimmel had made a comment about DeVito's health, or joked too closely about his condition. Others believed Danny had grown tired of the fake smiles and late-night nonsense, that it wasn't a moment of weakness, but a calculated decision to walk away from a system that never really accepted him. Then, days later, Danny broke the silence. He posted a short message on social media. No apology, no spin, no PR filter. I stand by everything I said. Sometimes the truth isn't easy to hear, especially under the lights. That single post poured gasoline on the fire. Some fans rallied behind him, praising his honesty. Others accused him of being unstable. A few insiders whispered that upcoming appearances were being quietly canceled. Bookings pulled, invitations withdrawn. Nothing confirmed. But the word blacklisted started showing up in headlines again. Jimmy Kimmel eventually released a statement of his own. "I have nothing but respect for Danny. I hope we can laugh about this one day." But by then, the moment had already become legend. It wasn't just about the walk-off. It was everything it symbolized. A man who'd been bending for 60 years finally refused to bend anymore. He wasn't trying to go viral. He wasn't angling for sympathy. He was just done pretending that decades of pain, physical and emotional, hadn't taken a toll. And even as the noise swirled, Danny didn't fade. He went back to work. At 79, he began producing a sports docuseries called Game 7 for Prime Video, a family project with his kids, Jake and Lucy, as co-producers. He kept shooting It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, now entering its 20th season, still crawling out of couches and soaking in trash water for the laughs. But this time, people saw it differently. Not just as commitment to the bit, but as a quiet act of endurance. A man in pain, refusing to stop, refusing to be anyone but himself. The meltdown? The moment on Kimmel? It wasn't the end of Danny DeVito. It was the moment everyone finally saw what he'd been carrying. At 80, Danny DeVito remains a dynamic force in entertainment, seamlessly blending his professional pursuits with personal milestones. DeVito continues to captivate audiences with his role as Frank Reynolds in the 17th season of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which premiered on July 9, 2025. This season features a notable crossover episode parodying The Golden Bachelor, where DeVito reunites with his former Taxi co-star Carol Kane, adding a nostalgic touch to the series. In addition to his television work, DeVito stars in the holiday film A Sudden Case of Christmas, released in late 2024. The film showcases his versatility and commitment to family-friendly storytelling, co-starring his daughter Lucy DeVito. Family remains central to DeVito's life. In June 2025, he celebrated the marriage of his eldest daughter Lucy, describing the event as emotional and wonderful. Lucy, an accomplished actress, and DeVito have collaborated on various projects, reflecting their close bond. DeVito also embraces his role as a grandfather, expressing immense joy in spending time with his grandchildren. He has adopted unique health routines, including trampoline workouts, to stay in shape. His resilience and dedication to health exemplify his enduring spirit. In March 2025, DeVito was honored at the Roundabout Theatre Company's annual gala, receiving accolades for his contributions to theater. This recognition underscores his multifaceted talent and lasting impact on the performing arts. Danny DeVito never asked for sympathy. Not when his mother admitted she didn't want him. Not when his father turned violent. Not when doctors told him he'd never live without pain. Not even when Hollywood told him to change his face, his body, his very identity, just to fit in. He said no. He didn't want to be pitied. He didn't want to be reshaped. He wanted to prove that he could make people laugh, move them, matter to them, exactly as he was. And he did. He became one of the most recognizable actors on the planet, not despite his differences, but because he embraced them. He built a career on defiance, on risk, on showing up when no one expected him to, and then delivering in a way no one could forget. He's played villains, losers, monsters, maniacs, and somehow made them lovable. He's directed cult classics, produced Oscar-winning films, and quietly poured millions into helping kids suffering from the same condition he still lives with. He didn't just survive rejection. He turned it into fuel. He didn't just fight pain. He used it to shape unforgettable characters. And he didn't just break the rules. He rewrote them. Even now, in his 80s, Danny DeVito is still working, still making people laugh, still showing up in places no one expects, still taking hits and standing back up. He may not fit the mold, but maybe the mold was broken for a reason. Because people like Danny don't come along often. And when they do, they don't ask to be seen. They demand it.